My dear students and viewers, I am Puranjay Biswas, Professor and Chairman, Department of English, Dhaka College, affiliated with the University of Dhaka. I welcome you to my today's lecture on Two Daffodils, written by Robert Herrick. My today's topic is the figures of space as we find in the poem Two Daffodils. There are some figures of space that we can find in this poem, such as apostrophe, personification, alliteration, assonance, irony, symbol, simile, metaphor, euphemism, climax, imagery, allusion, and so on. I want to explain the poem showing the use of all these figures of space. At first come to apostrophe. Apostrophe is a kind of address to a person or a thing absent. Apostrophe may be also an address to a dead person. In the beginning of the poem, we find apostrophe, such as, "Fair daffodils, we weep to see you haste so soon." Here the poet addresses the daffodils. And of course, daffodils are some flowers which are addressed by the poet by the poet as fair daffodils. So this is a kind of apostrophe. We also find personification in this poem. What is personification? Personification is a figure of space in which a thing or an abstract idea is presented to be a person. By this, I mean that some human qualities are attributed to a lifeless thing or to an abstract idea. In this poem, daffodils are personified as human beings to whom the poet speaks. Again, in the third line, we also find personification. As yet, the early rising sun has not attained his noon. You can see the use of his. The sun is personified when we find the use of his. Now, another important factor is alliteration that we also find in this poem. What is alliteration? Alliteration means the repetition of the same sound in the beginning of some closely related words. As for example, we find alliteration stay. So the sound S is repeated in the beginning of these two words. In the same way, we, we've, we, here we find also the use of alliteration. We also find assonance. Now, what is assonance? Assonance is the repetition of the same vowel sound in closely related words. As for example, suppose stay, stay. Here the vowel sound a is repeated. Again in you hast, away. So here we also find the repetition of same vowel sound, and this is called assonance. My dear students, another important figure of speech that we find here is irony. Now what is irony? Irony is a kind of figure of speech which means the opposition between appearance and reality, and between what is said and what is meant. As for example, in this poem, when the poet says, stay, stay until the hasting day has done, this is the request of the poet to the daffodils. Though the poet knows that it is not possible for the daffodils to stay, because the stay of the daffodils is not controlled by the daffodils. It is in the hand of the passing time. Yet the poet makes this request to the daffodils to stay till the evening. This type of request is a kind of irony, because there is the difference between the poet's request and the reality. Another important figure of speech is symbol. There are some symbols used in this poem. At first, daffodils. Daffodils are symbol of beauty, symbol of gaiety, happiness of life. Daffodils symbolize transitoriness of human life. We also find simile. In this poem. What is simile? Simile is a kind of explicit comparison between two dissimilar things with the use of like, such as, and so on. When we use as or like for comparison, it becomes explicit. As for example, if we say, you look like a flower. So you is a person, flower is something else, something different. Yet we imagine that you and the flower are the same on the ground of some beauty or purity. In this poem, we also find some of the important figures of speech that I want to discuss now. Okay? As for example, I can say that in the second part of the poem, we find some similes, such as short a spring or as quick a growth again as you, again as your hours do, and at last like to the summer's rain, or as the pulse of morning's dew. All these are the similes, because human youth is compared to spring. Youth is the best and golden period of human life. In the same way, spring season is the best of all seasons. And spring is the symbol of happiness, prosperity, regeneration, rebirth, and even a resurrection. Whatever. In this poem, we find a similarity between a spring and youth. Both spring and youth are short and transitory. Again, summer's rain is also compared to the transitoriness of human life. Summer rain drops fall on the ground, which is extremely hot. And as soon as the raindrops fall on the ground in summer, they evaporate and dry off, disappear within a short time. In the same way, human beings are born just to meet decay and death. Thus, human beings and summer's raindrops are compared explicitly, using as, like, and so on. So all these are the similes. We also find metaphor. What is metaphor? Metaphor is a kind of figure of space which refers to implicit comparison between two dissimilar things. And in a metaphor, we find no use of like, as, such as, etc. And thus it becomes implicit comparison. As for example, pearls of morning's dew. Pearls of morning's dew is a kind of metaphor, because morning dews are compared to pearls. Pearls and morning's dew are two different things, but they are imagined to be the same on the ground of beauty. Pearls look beautiful, glittering and shining. In the same way, morning's dew drops that fall on grass and leaves at night look very beautiful, shining and bright at the sunrise in the morning. So both pearls and morning's dew are same on the ground of brightness and beauty. And by morning's dew, the poet also means the transitoriness of human life. Morning dew drops have a short span of time to stay. Morning dew drops fall on the grass or leaves, but as soon as the sun rays fall on them, they evaporate and disappear within a short time. Human life on earth is as transient as the beautiful daffodils, as summer's rain, and as the dew drops in the morning. My dear students, we can also find the use of the figure of speech called euphemism. What is euphemism? Euphemism means the use of some particular words or phrases to express some soft and mild expression instead of hard and blunt expression. In fact, in euphemism, the poet reduces the harsh effect of some certain words by replacing it with some mild and soft words. For example, the poet has used the word dry. Okay? And dry has been used in place of die. The word die has a harsh and blunt effect, reminding of death. But when we use the word dry in place of die, it becomes euphemism, because the word dry is somewhat soft and mild, though it implies death. So this is euphemism. We also find climax. What is climax? Climax means the highest, most intensive and exciting point of some statement, of some expression. Climax means the apex or the highest peak to express our feelings, our emotions, our expression. In this poem, we find this ascending movement of the thought and expression of the poet. In the last line, we find the climax of the poem. The whole poem is based on the philosophical theme of transitoriness of human life. But follow the last line. Ne'er to be found again. That is, human beings die and die forever, as the pulse of morning's dew never come back. In the same way, human beings meet decay and death and never come back. And this is the climax of the poem. My dear students, we also find image. What is image? Image is also a kind of figure of speech, which means word picture, which creates a mental picture. When we read some lines such as fair daffodils we weep to see, you haste so. So a kind of image creates in our mind about the daffodils. The beautiful daffodils have bloomed in a field, and there is charming sight that attracts our eyes, and there is a kind of reflection of picture on our mind regarding the daffodils. So this is a kind of image, and imagery is the totality of images that are used in a poem. So in this poem we find some images. There is also allusion. What is allusion? Allusion is also a kind of figure of speech which means some indirect reference to some persons or some incidents, referring to either classical writing, myth, biblical sources, historical sources, and so on. So when a poet brings some things or persons or some events from some sources to mean the present person or incident or emotions, it turns into allusion. So allusion means a kind of indirect reference. Some critics have found allusion in this poem, particularly daffodils. In the Bible, there is the use of flowers and grass in the sense of transitoriness. Human life is as beautiful as flowers and grass. But like grass, like flowers, human life is also transient. This kind of concept is found in the Bible. So, in this poem, flowers like daffodils have been used, referring to the biblical expression of transitoriness of human life. Thus, it can be interpreted as illusion. My dear students and viewers, I have discussed some important figures of speech which are essential part of literature. Now, what is the purpose of figures of speech? Now, what is figures of speech? Figures of speech mean some words and phrases that possess some separate meaning from literal meaning. And figures of speech are rhetorical ornaments that embellish language to express different kinds of emotions, thoughts, and ideas. In fact, figures of speech adorn language. figures of space attract our attention and give connotative meaning. Thus, the use of figures of speech is a creative and artistic device used in different genres of literature. My dear students and viewers, Robert Herrick has shown his skill in using all these figures of space. Thank you. See you next. All the best.